Hey everybody, welcome to the Angst Podcast. My name is Jericho, I am your host. Super excited to be bringing you guys a new episode here today on the topic of psychedelics. More specifically, this is going to be an LSD trip report, my very own, my first ever. But this is not the first time that I've talked about psychedelics here on the podcast. If you rewind the clock maybe a year or so, I've actually done a psilocybin or a magic mushrooms trip report before. And I kind of feel that magic mushrooms, LSD, they're all tools in the toolkit in the psychedelic universe, but I kind of feel like there's a little bit of progressionary steps between some of these substances. For me, I chose to start with the mushroom because I kind of had this psychological chemical barrier when it came to synthesized compounds. There was something about the mushroom with being able to pick up a mushroom, it looks like a mushroom, it smells like a mushroom, it tastes like a mushroom. If I was to go to the internet, I was to Google images of psilocybin mushrooms, those images would very similarly reflect the substance that I was holding. Just call it bro science if you will, but there was something tangible about the organic properties of the mushroom that just made it a little bit easier and more approachable for me. Because we live in the age of psychedelic prohibition and because this is a legal and totally unregulated market, when we're talking about synthesized compounds, I don't know who made them or where. I don't know the exact dosages or how much is necessarily being put into the tincture or onto the paper. That gave me a little bit of hesitancy and anxiety that I didn't feel would be responsible to bring with me into a psychedelic trip. So I've kind of had that hesitancy to go into something like acid for a while now. The breakthrough kind of secret piece for this specific trip though was that one of my best friends, who I trust very much, he actually sourced the LSD for us. And so he got a blotting paper, he had ripped off a couple of tabs of his own, and he had actually taken this paper and already tripped on it previously a month or two before my experience. So that kind of gave me the peace of mind to say, okay, he's taken it, he had no ill effects, he had a great experience, this is clearly LSD, it's not some made up who knows what. So that kind of gave me the peace of mind to actually pursue this specific tab. Before I get into the actual specifics of the day, guys, which if that's what you want to listen to, you can fast forward, you're an adult, you can figure out when I start talking about it. But before I actually get to the specifics of the day, I just want to really reiterate the importance. I think that the internet is littered with trip reports and blog posts and websites that have a lot of negative connotations with these substances, people that have had maybe not the most positive experiences. And I'm not here to take away or say what's happened to any one person. If you've had a negative experience, that's totally fair. Everybody is going to respond to these compounds entirely differently. But I also think that on the internet, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily do the correct protocol or the pre-work to get themselves into a successful psychedelic trip. And so some examples I can give you is that some people are maybe not in a mentally healthy mind state. Maybe they're struggling with depression. Maybe they've had some emotionally traumatic incidences occur over the last couple of months, and they're kind of carrying that momentum and that emotional weight into their psychedelic trip. So that's a no-no. Another thing I would say I see all the time is that people blend chemical compounds. And so whether it's just multiple psychedelics into one, you got MDMA, acid, and mushrooms all in the same 3-hour time scale, or maybe you're introducing some non-psychedelic compounds, maybe you're just drinking a ton of coffee, maybe you have a ton of alcohol, you're partying at a rave. I think that the mixing and the blending concoction psychedelic cocktails maybe a recipe for disaster. It might not taste very good when you get in there, and whose fault's that? The list could go on and on. I'm not here to point fingers at all, guys. I think that there's a lot of reasons why a trip can go negative, but I think that doing the groundwork to try to remove as many of those negative variables is super important. For me personally, I'll just tell you what that looks like. It's coming into the headspace where I'm not emotionally traumatized, so I'm happy with life. I'm not feeling depressed. I haven't had any major downfalls or setbacks in the last couple of weeks coming into this trip. I've also personally taken on a meditation practice over the last year or so that I think greatly aids me in any psychedelic endeavors. Meditation has kind of taught me a little bit of a skill that I can consciously take one step back and remove myself from the driver's seat of everyday experience. So normally this version of me that is the kind of the protagonist in the driver's seat that constantly needs to react to stimuli and to different thoughts can kind of take a step back and just be in the backseat and just be an observer to the experience and not necessarily have to react. I think that that's super valuable because when you're having a psychedelic trip, the ebbs and flows of the energy are so readily apparent and obvious that naturally there's going to be really good ones and really fun ones. And naturally there might be some less fun ones or some that are more intense. And so in those more intense energy emotions, I think that what some people do is when they're tripping is they kind of dig their feet into the sand. They kind of push in their heels and they say, you know what, I didn't sign up for this. I took this substance to have a good, fun experience, and this is bad vibes, and I'm not going to let any of those bad vibes influence me. So they kind of fight it, whereas that's not the way to proceed in a psychedelic experience. Instead, what you want to do is you want to act as an observer. You want to take kind of a secondary approach and say, let me acknowledge that these energies are coming in, and let me just let that happen. I mean, it's not something I have to fight necessarily, but maybe these energies are coming up because I normally in my sober reality get to suppress them down all the time. And maybe there's going to be some inherent value of letting some of these negative emotions or some of these bad thoughts come into play, and just see what happens instead of immediately becoming defensive and getting into this wrestling match with the psychedelic, because guess what? You're going to lose. In your normal, regular day-to-day state, you might be able to fight away some of these energies, but in the psychedelic state, usually it's best to just give in and relax. And in my opinion, meditation and breath work and the ability to kind of remove yourself from that visceral experience is super valuable. So I would highly recommend a meditation practice, even if you're not going to do psychedelics. To get back to the actual trip report itself, here's kind of how the day looked like. So like I mentioned, I'm surrounded by friends. This is an annual snowboard trip that we take every year. So I'm on vacation, I'm in the wilderness, I'm in the mountains, it's a sunny day, the energy is all good. We decide that we're going to take this at noon. So we wake up, we have a little bit of a light breakfast, and then we kind of start to get into the protocol and the routine of what the trip's going to look like. So for my friend group personally, we try to take this as seriously and respectfully as possible. So we had purchased some ceremonial tobacco, some like OG high quality tobacco, to basically force away any negative spirits. And so we rolled up a couple of blunts. We stood around in a circle, we took the tabs of the LSD, and we basically all smoked this tobacco and then exhaled the smoke onto the acid itself to cleanse it of any negative energy. For some people, I know that might be a little hippy-dippy, a little bit over the top, but for me personally, regardless of your beliefs, I think that it's kind of just a system of checks and balances. I made a conscious effort to remove negative energy from my system. So whether it was the tobacco that did that and the spirits and the energy of the tobacco actually cleansing the acid, or it was just my own conscious energy set intention, it's irrelevant because the task is performed, or the intention and the outcome is going to be the same. To add on to the hippie stuff, after we had ceremonially blessed the tobacco, or blessed the acid with the tobacco, we then took some sage and we saged the property and the house. This is someone else's property. We're going to try to show as much respect to them as possible, respect their space. I don't know the energy that this property necessarily has carried over the last year or decade, whatever it may be. So we'll try to cleanse that as well. Again, just a check and balance, a protocol piece to make sure that we're getting everything set up and ready to go. And then finally, it's noon. So we take the acid tab, insert it underneath our tongue, sit down, and we do a little meditation. Set the mind right, set the breath right, got into that headspace of how would I be able to control thought that's coming in, and just kind of chilled up, let it come on a little bit naturally. And just, you're so, when you're meditating, you're aware of these minor little stimuli changes as well, right? Because there's not really anything going on. So as energy starts to pick up, your breath starts to change, this is apparent and obvious to you. So we kind of let the high come on, and I think it was a 20-minute meditation. By the end, we could feel something, like there was a tangible, I feel good, I feel calm, I feel like maybe something's going on, but we definitely weren't high, which I'll be honest, I say it was a surprise because I was under the impression, doing my own research, that acid was going to kind of kick in kind of quick because it is a chemical compound, because I don't have to break down the organic material that a mushroom would have through the digestive system. I thought it would go a little faster, but honestly, it took a while to come on. I would say by the time we were actually genuinely feeling the effects was probably like 90 minutes after actually placing the tab underneath our tongue. So it took a little while. After the meditation, we went outside. We were staying on like a 2-acre property. There was kind of a little frozen pond, some snow, a little bit of like bushes and forest in the back of the property. We went outside with a rugby ball. We just started tossing around the rugby ball, telling jokes, having fun. We played jackpot, just trying to get the heart rate up and get moving in nature. And like I said, it took about 90 minutes, and it was a nice kind of slow and gradual uplift. If I can go back to my psychedelic experience on psilocybin, it kind of feels like you're sitting in a rocket ship. And so you eat this mushroom, and there's kind of this countdown and then an eventual blast off. And so if you do a big enough dose, it kind of feels like you're getting ripped out of the sober reality and shot into the stratosphere that is the psychedelic consciousness, or into the psychedelic dimension. And so with mushrooms, it's this kind of cloudy, it's like G-force on you. It's like, I almost want to fight it. I almost want to stay sober, but you're getting pushed in this direction anyways. With LSD, or at least my specific experience on this day, it didn't feel like that at all. It felt like a road trip, like a more gradual, like, yeah, you know, it'll be a couple hours, but we'll get there. Like, half the fun's the road trip. We're just going to hang out anyways. And so it was this like very easygoing, and in my opinion, a lot more approachable than psilocybin. I think that psilocybin, the kind of the rise or the takeoff is a lot more intimidating, and I have multiple experiences to make that claim. Whereas on acid, it kind of just felt like this slow incremental climb. I could feel the changes, and it wasn't this crazy roller coaster ride. It was way more like caring, and it was way more approachable, if you will. So maybe in hindsight, just a side thought, but maybe in hindsight, although I understand the chemical component, if I'm just relaying the experiences for a first-time user, somebody that has no psychedelic experience, I'm going to give it to acid as being a little bit more approachable, a little bit more manageable and calm, as opposed to the organic and the safe compound that is psilocybin mushrooms. But that's just a little bit of a side note. As the day continued, first impressions, guys, what I could see is colors were looking more vibrant. Greens were shining through the forest. There was the colors of the sun, and the energy of the sun was radiating off the snow. I could really feel it and feel the warmth all over the place. As I started to trip more and more, I don't know how to describe this term. I'm going to use the word energy, but I have nothing to back this up. But I could start to see flows throughout all of reality. It didn't matter if it was the ground, the trees, the mountains, the sky, my friends. There were kind of these particles, if you will, that like rivers or a stream. They had a direction. They kind of looked like, they moved in a fractal pattern, the same way the bronchioles within your lungs or your nervous system or tree branches or rivers, like they had this flowing kind of finger breaking off kind of style patterning to them. And it was interesting because, one, it was beautiful. It was interesting for at least for me, it felt like I could see the energy, like I could see the atoms and the molecules and the energy of my whole system moving and flowing within everything. It didn't matter, it was everywhere. But it also did something very just abstractly weird to depth perception. And so with hanging out with a couple of my buddies, if somebody was to walk like further away, it was very cartoon-esque, and like obviously they're getting smaller, but like they were getting really small. Like it looked like if they just kept stepping backwards, they would eventually just disappear into nothingness, into a black hole or into a tiny dot. And I think the reason that this happened was because I could see kind of these waves that didn't seem to play with the regular perceptions of, that's a lake, that's land, that's a tree, that's a mountain. Normally you get these objective kind of depth perception skews on a landscape. Because I had these vertical energy flows that were kind of superseding those regular normal depth perception lines, as my friends walked around, or as anybody moved through the space, it looked very cartoon-esque that things were like inflating and deflating and changing their side in a very like abstract and different way. So that's just something that visually was kind of quite cool. I honestly expected a little bit more like kind of kaleidoscopic, crystal looking visuals, I guess you may. There was this ebb and flow that was clear, and it was very apparent in living matters. So like my friends or trees, I could see it like very vibrantly, and it would morph and create different shapes and kind of move around. But that was an experience I had very similarly to psilocybin mushrooms, and I thought that it would be a little bit more crystallized on LSD. And for me personally, that wasn't exactly the case. So at this point, we're about a tab in, we're having fun, I'm feeling energy flowing, and one of my friends basically pipes up and says, "Hey guys, do you want to do some more?" And so we're all kind of like, "Oh man, like I don't know, like that's like, should we?" And he basically says, "If you guys are having fun, if we're having a good time, like it's not going to get much more intense than this. Like you guys kind of feel like where we're at, this is where we're at." So we all say, "You know what, let's do it. Let's do more LSD." So at this point, we didn't quite have enough time, we're ripping things up. We're trying to make it as even as possible. But I would think all said and done, at noon, we consumed 1 tab. And at 1:30, 1:45, we consumed another half plus like maybe another quarter. So if you will, 1.75 tabs. But again, back to the bro science, guys, who knows, right? Like, it was on a blotting paper, it's spread out. I don't even know if one tab is actually, if it actually equates to like 100 micro units or whatever the measurement is for acid, that it's like, okay, it's hard to say exactly tangibly how much we necessarily had, but we did take the upper, and again, I'm happy we did, because overall it was a great, fantastic day, and I felt confident enough in that the energy was flowing in the positive direction that we could see what this thing has left in the tank a little bit higher up. So now it's like 145, we're definitely into the high, we've taken a little bit of an upper, started hanging out with my friends, and we've made our jokes, and now everybody's kind of like, we're really tripping now. And so I end up sitting on the ground with one of my buddies, and I'm just watching nature. I'm watching birds fly around. There's a neighbor has horses back in the landscape. There's like a lake and mountains. It's really beautiful scenery. And I'm just trying to take it all in, and me and my buddy, we start talking about Wim Hof. We start talking about meditation and a little bit of breath work. And so we start doing some Wim Hof breath work. So we're taking these, for anybody who doesn't know, we're taking these large exaggerated inhales and then these very like passive exhales. So we're basically forcing oxygen in and a very passive release exhale. Forcing oxygen in, passive release. And we're trying to do this basically hyper-oxygenating our environment, which if you've never done it, if you guys don't know who Wim Hof is, I would definitely recommend checking this guy out. Excuse me. He's a very interesting character. I love what he has to say. I think that breath work is super important, whether it's holotropic, whether it's Wim Hof's, whether it's Kundalini, whether it's just regular meditation. Like, learning how to control and enhance the energy of the breath is a super valuable skill. And obviously hyper-oxygenating your environment is going to have a certain amount of feedback. It kind of gives you a little bit of tingling in your fingers and in your toes and your extremities. It kind of makes you feel lighter. And this is something that you do not need psychedelics to have a positive experience with. Again, search up Wim Hof, check out his website, check out his method. But on LSD, it's like a whole level up. It's like everything is so over the top. It feels like I'm this balloon that's just taking in energy out of the world and exhaling it back. And we feel so a part of the ebb and flow of like I said, guys, I can almost see the molecules in the air. I can see these energy flows, and I see them coming into me with every inhale and then leaving with every exhale. And this is like me and my friends sitting on the ground here, like honestly really vibing with the breath work. We're having a ton of fun. We feel like $1,000,000. Normally this is a breath routine that I do to make me feel positive and energized anyways, and it's really enhanced when working on acid. And so we spent a little bit of time there, started to talk about kind of, information in the world versus information in our minds. And so this is a concept that I think it's been thrown around outside of the psychedelic community, but it really seems to shine when you're tripping. There are clearly things that we contain in our head. Let's say I was to shoot out an example. What is 237 times by 62? And if you're somewhat good at any arithmetic, you could do this in your head. Like, I believe that you could. I really believe in each and every one of you. But it wouldn't be instantaneous, for most of us at least. There would be a little bit of arithmetic that has to go down. We would kind of have to pause and think, and don't distract me. Like, I have to think, okay, maybe I could get the number. It would take a couple of processing seconds. If I allowed you, though, to then take that information out of your head and place it on a piece of paper. So now you have information in your head, and we're going to transfer it to information in the world. So now you can write out the arithmetic. I promise you're going to do it a lot faster. Now that you don't have to necessarily carry the one and remember all the numbers in your head, now that the information is being contained in reality for you, you've got this advantageous step. So it'll be a little bit more efficient. And I've been playing with this idea in a couple different domains, because how do we as human beings learn pretty much anything? I mean, there's this genetic code that I guess you could say is like information in the head. But is it really? I mean, it's kind of information from the world. It's like information from your two parents. So, I mean, that's a nature-nurture argument we don't need to get into. But as you grow up, people are going to have to teach you things. And some things can be taught just by a teacher or somebody with a certain amount of knowledge expressing them to you in a medium like this, like a podcast, in a textbook, whatever it may be. But that's not the only way that you gain information. You also gain information by raw experience. Placing your hand on a hot stove is good enough that's information in the world that's hot, right? And you can start to learn certain variables about your reality. In fact, I think that there's a lot of very, very valuable principles about being a human being that actually only come from your own experience. I can tell you everything that I know all day, every day, but you're going to take it with a grain of salt. Like, you're only going to appreciate it so much because you have your own biases and perception and expectations of reality and the world around us. So some things can't really be taught. They have to just be felt. They have to just be experienced. And it's interesting because during this trip and after the breath work, we kind of walk back up to the house, and there's, a nice big wraparound patio. We're chilling on the patio. At this point, we brought some speakers out. We're playing Novo, I think is how you say it. Beautiful band, beautiful tripping music. If anybody's looking for a band to trip on psychedelics with, it was super high energy, good vibes coming through the whole album and the whole radio. But basically, we have music playing. The sun is starting to come down a little bit. We're getting that golden hour kind of hue coming onto the house. Me and my friends are hanging out. And if you guys haven't figured this out by now, I'm a bit of a fast talker. I kind of like to ramble. I'm a conversationalist. So for me, when I'm tripping on psychedelics, I'm constantly fighting to articulate my experience. And it's really tricky because a psychedelic experience is ineffable. It's hard to convey to sober people. It's one of those things where everything that you're feeling, you tangibly know it to be true, but when I try to explain it or create a sentence that explains the emotion, I seem to fumble on my words. And even now, like when I think back on the experience, there's certain things that I can remember inherently, but it's hard for me to convey or to paint an image to somebody that has never had the experience themselves. And so me personally, sitting with all my buddies, I've been tripping for enough hours that I'm trying to now come up with some explanations or some theories or some concepts, or have you guys noticed this about life, or have you guys in the last hour had this experience? And I'm trying to create this conversation to basically solve problems of psychedelic trips and consciousness, if you will. But what I had noticed is that this information in my head wasn't conveying itself very well. Like, I was having a hard time getting it out. The information in the world, however, seemed to be radiating in. Like, if you just found stillness, so if I noticed that if I just shut up, if I just stopped talking with a couple of my buddies and stopped conversing, and I didn't get distracted by the world, but I just picked a point of focus and I just chilled in that space and I spent a couple of minutes in that space, I started getting the amount of information and thought. Like, I had said this in my mushroom trip report, but it almost feels like the thoughts are not your own. Like, your subconscious is working on a scale where information seems to be coming in. Principles of the universe, raw data just seems to be coming in a way that is so overwhelmingly truthful. Normally in reality, I think that a lot of the thoughts that we have are kind of abstract. There are opinions. This is what I think, and obviously I believe what I think. But when you're in this psychedelic state or this meditative, like, different level of consciousness state, the information that comes in seems to be of a really high quality. It's almost like I don't have my regular biased perceptions that are Jericho's opinions of the world filtering all of my thoughts. Instead, I'm getting more concrete, like, universal truths. And I think that this is why some people have expressed that their psychedelic trips almost feel more tangibly real than everyday waking reality. And I think that's a point that it's embarrassing for me to say, because if you're somebody that's never done psychedelics, it's easy to explain away. It's easy to explain, you are under the influence of a psychedelic, you had a chemical influence in your system. Of course, it's going to ramp up all of your perceptions. It's going to make happiness feel more happy. It's going to make colors feel more vibrant, and it's going to make thoughts feel more true, right? It's like, but that's not it. It's just you're assigning everything meaning, even though it doesn't have meaning. And it's so hard to convey to somebody that's never tripped before, because how would I possibly prove to you that state somehow almost feels more correct or more natural or more genuine than this regular state? I think the way that I've come to look at it is that throughout years of human evolution, or actually I shouldn't even say human evolution, throughout years of organic evolution, of life's evolution, it sprung off into all of these different trajectories. And all of these different species are having an experience that is uniquely their own. And so we function on a 5-sense reality that's very human, and it's adapted us and given us a certain sets of skills that have given us ability to survive and thrive in our environment. We very arrogantly assume that humans are the echelon, like the top peak, the alpha predator. So our adaptations and our evolution must be like the most valuable, the most correct. And so that when we function in our 5-sense reality, we are seeing reality. But that's clearly not the case, because there's all of these other species that also function our reality that don't see or interpret it our way at all. I mean, think of like the ecosystem of bugs, for example. You could see an ant crawling, let's say it's gathering up resources or food and it's bringing it back to the nest or to the queen. It's like, and you stand above this ant. Is that ant even cognitively like aware of your presence, of its reality? Right? Like, it wouldn't be. Like, it has a path, it has a script that it is to exit and grab materials or resources and bring it back into the hive. This is the same with, any bug of any kind almost seems to be functioning on a little bit more of like a automated mechanism, or a little bit less of a conscious mechanism. So we just discredit it and we just say, yeah, but they're not self-aware, they're not conscious like a human, right? But clearly they're still functioning within reality. What is real to them is just different than what's to us. And what if I took a more intelligent, like consciously intelligent species like a dolphin or an orca, something that's functioning in a totally different plane of reality that is the ocean, that doesn't need new iPhones or new cars, or doesn't need to think about what its friends think of them or what they said last night at the party because now they're embarrassed. Like, their whole reality and perception of what is real in their ecosystem is entirely different. And so to get back to the trip, what I think has almost happened is that humans have progressed to have a certain amount of skills that allow us to thrive and interact with our environment. We take that environment as being concrete, correct. It is real. It is the only thing that exists, essentially. Psychedelics do a really good job of basically, in my opinion, lowering those evolutionary restrictions that normally do a really good job of making you a productive member of society, but they lower it down and they suppress the ego into a way that you're able to absorb what I think is actually more correct or real, because we've suppressed away the ego that is human evolution and human consciousness. And so you're getting to interact in the ecosystem in a way that isn't as biased to our regular day-to-day sobriety. And so that information that's in the world that you're just, again, it's hard to describe without being there, guys, but I could literally just stare at a fire, and I felt like as the fire was moving, it was literally teaching me principles about how to live, how to be a good person, how to care about your family. And I know it sounds insane, but it almost felt like if I wasn't interacting with the fire, I wouldn't be getting these principles. Like the fire itself was the messenger of the ecosystem. And this actually scales up to something even larger, guys, of your faith in God or in a religion or of a higher power. And a quick thought experiment that I would give you is that if you were an all-knowing teacher, if you were an infinitely wise teacher, and you had set out to teach others what you knew, but you didn't have your senses, you didn't have touch, you didn't have speech, you couldn't write it out. I mean, how would you convey this information? Like, what would be the medium of exchange to get information out there? And I think about this quite frequently with a higher power or with a God. If God did exist, we so badly want to make it about humans. We want to say, why doesn't God just tell us? Why doesn't God just teach us? Why doesn't they just show us the way? And I constantly think about all the ways that God might be doing that we just don't accept because we have blinders on of how we perceive information. If it's not coming through a screen or a textbook, or if somebody's not teaching me, then how am I supposed to learn it? It's hidden within the world, which is, again, it's a big concept. It's hard to describe. It's a work in progress. So hopefully in future episodes, I'll be able to dive into this topic a little bit more. But there's opportunities when you find stillness, when you suppress that ego, when you accept information that's coming in and you don't dig your heels into the ground, but you just allow things to flow through you. I think you'd be surprised. And throughout this trip, it was an incredibly insightful experience about the values of being a good human being, the values of family and the ones that you love, and being close to a community and a network of people that supports you. Like, for me, that was what really shined through in the trip and came through probably more powerfully than anything else. And I think that, yeah, and it was one of those experiences where, like, I would highly, highly recommend this to everybody. I know I'm biased because I had a positive experience, so that makes it a little bit easier for me to say this, but it was something that was so uniquely powerful. It was something unlike anything else that I ever get to experience in my day-to-day existence, that it really changes my ability to look at reality and look at what it means to be a human being here on planet Earth going forward. A little bit of a side topic is that currently I'm recording this video during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think the date is like April 6th or something like that. So I'm currently in quarantine, I'm in lockdown, and the whole world's been kind of fearful for the last little while. And I think that we're all kind of just waiting to get back to normal. And I think we're all kind of just sitting here and waiting. Oh, I hope that we get a vaccine. Oh, I hope this disease goes away so that we can just keep going back into our regular, everyday human being society that we've evolved to function in. And I offer you a thought experiment to say that if there is a higher power, if there is a God or an all-knowing teacher, and it had something to teach you, but it didn't have a way, it couldn't write it down, it couldn't produce a YouTube video or a podcast, how could it show you or teach you a lesson? And I guess that just in doing this podcast and living in this time right now, for me personally, COVID is a very unique lesson that is being brought to the entire planet and the human species as a whole. And I think it has a very strong purpose to play. I think that it's so easy to dig our heels into the ground and say, well, people are dying. This is super negative. It has no positive aspect to it at all. But that's not how God usually works. It's not how the universe usually conveys information. It's not in black and white. It's not good or bad. It's usually both. And it's an opportunity to self-reflect and learn and adapt as a society as a whole. And so I think that just if I can add this little piece in since it's relevant, I think that COVID is an opportunity for us as a society to wake up to a greater experience, to something that's bigger than human, that maybe we've set up our global supply chains, our political institutions, our healthcare systems in a way that is inherently biased towards humans and not biased towards the energy systems of the entire planet or to anything larger or bigger than us. And it's easy to understand when we don't have things like psychedelics within our society to give us an opportunity to have these consciousness resets or these momentum breaks. When we suppress those opportunities and take them away, then the momentum of the human experience and the human reality just continuously carries us forward, maybe in a bad direction. And so I'm throwing it out there that maybe there's some good in something like COVID or an opportunity for us to look at what we need to do or change as a species, not just so that we are successful and thrive, but that the entire ecosystem is successful and thrives together as a unit. Side note, just to finish off, guys, to get back to the trip, what was really beautiful and really cool just to kind of polish things off was that at the end of the day, as the lights came down, this was like a 14 hour endeavor. I was still tripping at 1 a.m. at night, falling asleep. But when the lights came down and the night sky opened up, we were unbelievably blessed to receive such a clear night sky, a night sky that I haven't seen in years. It was poetic to me, guys. I live in a city. There's a lot of light pollution, There's a lot of light pollution that usually suppresses the stars and suppresses, again, our connection to a greater whole and something bigger than ourselves. It's something that our ancestors would have grown up seeing every single night, contemplating their place in this grand infinite universe that sits above them. And it was so cool to be able to reflect on that and see that during the come down of this psychedelic experience, because as a city boy, this is something that's been left out of my life for a really long time. And I actually think that it was like a poetic and beautiful end to the trip to really kind of crescendo things off, that, life's a little bigger than just you and me and a little bigger than just humans here on Earth. And that was the lessons that I got out of the LSD trip. So it was a really cool time. I'm excited to pursue it again, and hopefully I'll be able to get a couple more notes, craft a couple more ideas, and bring you guys that trip report when it happens. So chat soon. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good one.